Story 1. The bus depot that never announced my stop. I wasn't supposed to be at the depot that late. My bus was delayed, a mechanical issue, they said, and by the time it finally dropped me off in the middle of nowhere, the last connecting route had already left. The driver barely looked at me when he told me I'd have to wait until morning. "Depot stays open," he mumbled. "Just don't wander." The building looked tired, not abandoned, just forgotten. Fluorescent lights buzzed weakly above cracked tile floors. Plastic seats were bolted in uneven rows, some missing entirely. The air smelled like dust, oil, and something faintly sour, like damp fabric left too long in the dark. I told myself it was fine, just a few hours. I didn't realize the place had already noticed me. The waiting area was nearly empty. A security guard slept behind the front desk, head tilted back, mouth slightly open. A single vending machine hummed near the far wall, its glass fogged with age. I chose a seat near the center, set my bag at my feet, and checked my phone. No signal. That wasn't unusual, but when I looked up again, the digital arrival board flickered. Routes appeared and disappeared without any pattern. Times rearranged themselves. Destinations I'd never heard of flashed briefly, then vanished. I watched longer than I should have. Then a voice crackled over the PA system. "Now boarding." It cut off mid-sentence. I looked around, expecting movement, but the waiting area remained empty. The guard didn't stir. The vending machine continued its low mechanical hum. A few seconds later, the PA clicked again. "Stand clear," then silence. The speakers crackled softly as if breathing. Bus depots are noisy places, even when they're empty. Old wiring, faulty equipment, sounds carry. That explanation lasted until I heard footsteps. They echoed from the corridor leading to the platforms, slow, deliberate, and heavy enough to be unmistakable. I leaned forward, peering into the hallway. No one emerged. The footsteps continued, stopping just out of sight. "Hello?" I called. My voice sounded wrong and the space flattened, swallowed by the high ceiling. For a moment, nothing happened. Then the footsteps resumed, retreating this time, fading deeper into the depot. I stayed seated, pulse quickening, telling myself it was probably a late driver or maintenance worker. Probably I stood to stretch and noticed something odd. The rows of seats behind me were different. It's not broken, arranged. Seats that had been missing earlier were now present, bolted neatly in place. Others were gone, leaving clean outlines in the dust where they'd once been. I was sure of it. I'd chosen my seat because of the empty space beside it. Now that space was filled, I stepped back instinctively, the depot felt. Attentive, like a room that quiets when someone important walks in. I turned slowly, scanning the waiting area, the corridors, the ticket booths, with their shutters half lowered like tired eyelids. Nothing moved, but I had the overwhelming sense that something had adjusted itself around me. The arrival board flickered again. This time only one route appeared. Last stop, now boarding. No time, no platform number, just those words. The PA crackled to life, clearer than before. "Passenger, please proceed." The voice was calm, flat. Not automated, but not alive either. It used the singular. "Passenger, not boarding," I said aloud, surprising myself. The lights dimmed slightly, not off, just lower. The vending machine went silent. The sleeping guard shifted, murmured something unintelligible, then went still again. The depot seemed to lean inward, listening. I grabbed my bag and headed toward the front desk. Halfway there, a door slammed shut behind me. I spun around. The corridor to the platforms was now blocked by a metal gate I hadn't noticed before. It rattled once, then settled. The PA spoke again. "Please remain in the waiting area." My mouth felt dry. "I'm just waiting for morning," I said. "That's all." The arrival board changed. Delayed then. Beneath it, smaller text appeared. "Stay seated." I hadn't sat down. Chairs scraped loudly across the floor. I jumped as several seats near the walls shifted, dragging themselves into straighter rows. The sound was slow and controlled, like furniture being adjusted by unseen hands. One chair moved slightly closer to me, stopped, then moved again. I backed away until my legs hit another row. The footsteps returned. This time, they came from everywhere at once, echoing from corridors, platforms, stairwells I hadn't noticed before. I could hear the weight of the walker, the drag of something heavy, someone who had been making this walk for a long, long time. A shape appeared at the far end of the waiting area. At first I thought it was a trick of the lights, a shadow stretching too far. Then it stepped forward. It looked like a person in a bus driver's uniform, but faded, as if viewed through dirty glass. The cap sat too low, hiding its face. Its movements were stiff, practiced, repetitive. It stopped several meters away. "You missed your stop," it said. The voice didn't come from the PA. It came from everywhere else. "I didn't," I replied, my voice barely steady. "I'm still alive." The figure tilted its head slightly as if considering this. "That doesn't change the schedule." The air grew cold. Not sharply, gradually, like the slow loss of warmth when a door is left open too long. The ghost raised one arm and pointed toward the gated corridor. "Final boarding?" The seats around me shifted again, tightening their formation, guiding. "No," I said. "I'm not going." The figure didn't move. Instead, the depot reacted. Lights along the ceiling turned on in sequence, leading toward the gate. The arrival board flashed, now boarding repeatedly. The footsteps behind me grew closer. I realized then that the ghost wasn't alone. This place was full of routines. Habits burned into the walls. Movements repeated so often they'd become permanent. The depot didn't know how to stop. It only knew how to move people through. Closed my eyes and focused on breathing. "I'm not a passenger," I said slowly. "Waiting." The lights flickered. Figure's outline wavered. For the first time, something like confusion rippled through the space. The ghost took a step closer. I could see its face, now blurred, indistinct, like it had been worn down by years of repetition. "How long?" it asked. "I don't know," I said honestly. The depot creaked softly, as if the building itself was thinking. The arrival board went blank. The PA crackled, then fell silent. The chair stopped moving. The ghost lowered its arms slowly, as though releasing something it had been holding for a very long time. "Waiting," it repeated, tasting the word. The figure stepped back. With each step, it faded, its edges dissolving into shadow, then into nothing at all. The temperature rose slightly. The vending machine hummed back to life. Somewhere, a bus engine started. Morning came quietly. Sunlight filtered through high windows, revealing dust motes drifting peacefully. The guard woke with a start, confused but unharmed. When the first real bus arrived, the arrival board displayed it normally. No extra routes, no warnings. As I boarded, I glanced back at the waiting area. For just a moment, I thought I saw a uniformed figure standing near the seats watching. Not hostile, just tired. Then the doors closed. The depot is still operating. People complain about hearing announcements that don't make sense, about lights guiding them the wrong way, about feeling rushed for no reason. I believe them. Some places don't haunt, they process. So if you ever find yourself in an old bus depot late at night, waiting for a ride that's been delayed, pay attention to what the building wants you to do, and whatever you hear announced, make sure it's actually your stop. Thanks for listening. If you enjoyed this story, be sure to follow for more. Story 2, The Office Floor That Rearranged Itself Overnight. The 7th floor wasn't condemned. That was the strange part. The company called it temporarily closed for restructuring, but no one could explain what kind of restructuring required an entire floor to be sealed off for almost a year. The offices above and below it were still operational. Elevators still stopped there, just for a moment before skipping to the next floor. I worked in IT support. When complaints started coming in about overnight system resets and equipment that just wasn't where it was left, I was assigned to investigate. "Just don't stay late," my supervisor told me, his voice a little too casual. Of course I stayed late. The elevator doors slid open onto pure silence. The lights were on, but they were dimmed, much lower than the rest of the building. Rows of cubicles stretched out ahead of me, their tall partitions casting long, uneven shadows across the carpet. Everything looked organized. Too organized. The desks were aligned with perfect mathematical precision. Every chair was tucked in at the exact same angle. The monitors were all tilted identically, their screens dark, but clearly powered on. Felt less like an office and more like a staged photograph, a sterile diorama waiting for its occupants. My footsteps sounded wrong on the floor. Muted, absorbed. The carpet didn't just soften the sound, it felt like it was swallowing it whole. Even the air felt thick, resistant, as if the simple act of moving through it required permission. I glanced at my watch, 7:42 p.m. Everyone else had gone home hours ago. I was completely alone, or so I thought. I started walking toward the server closet at the far end of the floor. Halfway there, I noticed something odd. The layout of the cubicle seemed different from when I first stepped out of the elevator. I stopped and slowly turned around. The path I'd just taken was no longer straight. The walls of the cubicles had shifted, angling subtly inward, narrowing the aisle behind me. It wasn't a dramatic, sudden change, just enough to be unsettling, just enough to notice. I told myself it was just exhaustion. All office spaces look the same after a while, right? The endless repetition of desks and chairs can play tricks on your perception. Still, a cold knot was forming in my stomach. I made a mental map of my path as I continued. 3 rows forward. Take a left turn. Past the big printer station. Except the printer station wasn't there anymore. I scanned the floor, my heart starting to pound. The printer now stood several meters away, nestled neatly between 2 desks that hadn't been next to each other before. As I stared, I heard a faint noise. The paper trays were sliding in and out, just a fraction of an inch, as if they were adjusting themselves. The moment I focused on the sound, it stopped. The silence that followed was heavier than before. "Hello?" called out. My voice didn't echo. It didn't seem to travel at all. It felt like the words barely left my mouth, soaked up by the thick dead air. And then, from somewhere deeper in the floor, came a response. The soft, unmistakable sound of a chair rolling slowly across the carpet. Then it stopped. I turned toward the sound, my breath catching in my throat. At the far end of an aisle, a single office chair was positioned perfectly in the center, facing me directly. It wasn't tipped over, it wasn't broken, it was placed. I took a cautious step back, wanting to retreat toward the elevators. But as I did, I heard another sound behind me. A second chair rolled smoothly into place, blocking the path I'd come from. My pulse quickened, hammering against my ribs. This wasn't a ghost. There was no cold spot, no shadowy figure, no eerie presence. There was only movement, tensional, mechanical, controlled movement. The floor itself was alive. I edged sideways, trying to find a different aisle, a new way out. But as I moved, the desks ahead of me slid inches closer together, closing the gap. I froze. The desks stopped moving. I took a step back. They relaxed, sliding apart again, but only barely. The floor was reacting to my movement. It was learning my intentions. The overhead lights began to flicker, not randomly, but in a specific sequence, forming a dim path that led toward the center of the floor, an invitation. I didn't want to follow it. When I turned away, the lights behind me went out completely. The darkness pressed in, heavy and immediate. I had no choice. I stepped forward onto the illuminated path, and the lights ahead of me brightened just slightly. The path led me to the center of the floor, an open meeting space with a long conference table and a dozen empty chairs. The moment I stepped into the clearing, the chairs scraped softly across the floor, tightening their circle around the table. They weren't trapping me, they were positioning me. On the wall, markers rattled inside a tray next to a large whiteboard. One of them lifted into the air, hovered for a second, and then touched the board, drawing a single, firm line. Another marker joined it, drawing a parallel line. Then another and another. It was drawing rows. I realized with a sickening jolt what it was drawing. It was a floor plan, cubicles, the exact layout of the office around me. This thing, this presence, wasn't just moving objects around for fun. It was planning. It was organizing. Suddenly, my radio crackled to life, first static, then a voice. It wasn't coming from the radio speaker, but layered over the static, a synthesized, disembodied whisper. Remain productive. The chairs around the table slid closer, and the air felt tighter, harder to breathe. "No," I said, my own voice barely a whisper. "I'm just here to fix something." The marker on the whiteboard paused its drawing. Then, it moved to a different section and began erasing a part of its design with slow, grinding strokes. The circle of chairs loosened slightly. It hit me then. The The poltergeist wasn't hostile. It was procedural. It was obsessive. This floor had learned a single set of behaviors and was now repeating them. Endlessly. Order, structure, efficiency. My presence was a variable it needed to account for, an element to be sorted. A desk lamp snapped on beside me. Then another, then dozens, one by one, illuminating each workstation as the computer screens flickered awake. Spreadsheets filled the monitors and less grids of empty cells, all waiting to be filled. Keyboards began to rattle faintly, in expectant, ghostly typing. I backed away from the table slowly. As I did, the desks shifted again, opening a narrow corridor that pointed directly toward the elevators. It wasn't forcing me out. It was allowing me to leave. I understood then this thing didn't want people gone. It wanted them arranged, productive, in their proper place. I moved slowly toward the exit, my eyes locked on the elevator doors. Behind me, I could hear the faint sounds of the floor resetting itself. Chairs returned to their designated desks. The whiteboard marker calmly erased itself clean. The main lights returned to their dim uniform glow. The elevator doors opened immediately when I pressed the button. Stepping inside felt like surfacing from deep water. The light was warm, normal. As the doors closed, I saw one last movement through the shrinking gap, a row of desks, sliding back into perfect, satisfying alignment. The next morning, the 7th floor was locked permanently. No explanation, no company-wide announcement. But every now and then, employees on other floors would report finding their desks moved overnight. Only slightly. Just enough to make them wonder. I transferred departments soon after. Avoid office buildings now, especially after hours. Because I learned that some workplaces don't just want you to work there. They want you to become part of the structure. They want you placed. So if you ever find yourself staying late at the office and you hear the faint sound of furniture moving when no one else is around, don't investigate. Don't respond. And whatever you do, don't let it finish organizing you. Thanks for watching. Story 3. Something learned the pattern beneath the station. I worked maintenance at the central train station for nearly 6 years. Long enough to know which sounds belonged and which didn't. Every machine has a voice. Every building a heartbeat. Trains had their rhythms, a heavy rumble that you could feel in your bones long before you heard it. The pipes had their own song too, a constant hum of water and pressure. Even the old brick walls had a kind of memory. You could tell when they were just settling with age versus when something was actively disturbing them. You learn to listen to these things when your job is to keep it all running smoothly. That's why the sound I heard one night, deep in the guts of the station, didn't make any sense. It wasn't loud, it wasn't sudden or alarming. It was curious. Soft, patient sound that had no business being there. Below the bustling platforms lies a world most commuters never see. A web of underground service corridors, officially closed to the public, but still monitored and occasionally accessed for maintenance. These tunnels connect old, forgotten storage rooms, critical power access points, and sections that were sealed off decades ago. On most nights, the only company you have down there is the echo of your own footsteps and the distant rumble of the last train home. But that night was different. Something moved after I stopped walking. It wasn't following me, not in the traditional sense. It felt more like it was waiting. I tried to rationalize it, of course. My first thought was pressure displacement. Air rushing through the tunnel after a massive train passed on the tracks just above my head. It's a common enough phenomenon, but the timing was all wrong. This sound only happened in the silence, in the exact moment I paused. A soft, dry scrape. Like something heavy but careful, adjusting its position on the concrete floor. As soon as I started walking again, the sound vanished. Complete silence, except for my own boots. I stopped again. Scrape. I walked. Silence. It was a call and response, and I was the one leading the dance. My next guess was an animal. Stray dog. Maybe a large rat. It was plausible enough. That explanation lasted right up until the lights flickered. They didn't go out completely, just dimmed. All at once, the entire corridor seemed to hold its breath. I know how that sounds, how crazy it is to say. An inanimate space felt attentive. But that's the only word for it. The air grew still, the low hum of the electrical conduits faded, and the whole tunnel felt like it was listening, not just to me, but with me. Something had our shared attention. The lights in that corridor were old, motion-activated models, spaced evenly along the low ceiling. Standard procedure. You walk, they pop on ahead of you, you pass, and a few seconds later they click off behind you, plunging the way you came back into darkness. It saves power, and it gives you a moving bubble of light. But that night, the light directly behind me stayed on. It just refused to turn off. At the same time, the one ahead of me refused to turn on. I was trapped in a single pool of pale yellow light, standing between a defiant glow behind me and an impenetrable darkness ahead. I had the sudden, chilling feeling that I'd just walked right up to the edge of something's awareness. Maintenance, I said aloud, mostly to hear my own voice. The word fell flat. It didn't echo the way it should have, bouncing down the long concrete hall. It just stopped, absorbed by the air. And then the darkness ahead of me shifted. It wasn't a visual change, not like a shadow moving. It was spatial. The corridor itself felt like it had just shortened by a few inches, the blackness pressing inward. Instinct took over. I took a quick step back, and the light behind me, the one that had stayed on, flickered violently. I didn't need another invitation, and I turned and left, moving a lot faster than I'd come in. I filed a report that night, something vague about lighting irregularities and potential sensor malfunctions. Nobody followed up, so the next shift I found an excuse to avoid that corridor. The shift after that, my supervisor assigned me there again specifically. "Check the wiring," he said. It's time I was prepared, or so I thought. I brought a heavy-duty handheld flashlight. The moment I descended the concrete stairs, I felt it. The air was heavier, colder, but not damp. It was a dry, controlled cold, artificial. As I started down the corridor, I began to count my steps, a nervous habit. 1, 2, 3. At 37, I stopped. The sound returned. That same soft scrape, but it was closer this time. It's much closer. It wasn't the sound of footsteps. It was the sound of repositioning. It's like a chess piece being moved on a board in response to my own position. It wasn't approaching me. It was aligning with me. I raised my flashlight and pointed it down the corridor. The beam shot out, but it seemed to stretch farther than it should have, as if the tunnel itself was elongating. The light was eventually swallowed by a darkness so profound it refused to reflect anything back. It was like pointing a light into a black hole, and then the beam bent. Not physically, it was perceptual, a trick of the eye and the mind. The light warped around a space it couldn't illuminate. Like something was standing right in the middle of the corridor, something far too large to fit, and my light was simply flowing around it. I took a hesitant step forward. The darkness retreated by exactly the same distance. I took a step back. It advanced, perfectly mirroring my movement. That's when the truly cold realization washed over me. This wasn't an animal. This wasn't a ghost. It wasn't reacting with aggression or fear. It was testing its boundaries. It was learning. Over the next week, that corridor became my own private laboratory. I experimented. I stopped at different points in the tunnel. I counted my steps, changing the number each time. I varied my pace, even tried taking alternate, longer routes to the same service panels, and every single time the entity adjusted, got faster, more efficient. It learned how long I typically paused. It knew which lights were supposed to flicker and which weren't. It knew the exact spots where I hesitated the most. It never touched me. It didn't have to. The fear wasn't about being attacked. The fear came from witnessing how quickly and perfectly it was learning me. By the fourth night of my little experiments, the corridor lights were already dimming just before I stopped walking. It was anticipating my actions. I reported the behavior again, more seriously this time. I tried to explain the patterns, the responsive nature of the malfunctions. They sent an electrician. He found nothing. They blamed faulty wiring, old sensors, anything but the truth. The very next night, the wiring and the sensors behaved perfectly, too perfectly. The lights came on with a crisp snap and shut off with a precise click. The system was flawless, as if to mock me. So I tried something different. I walked to the center of the corridor, stopped, and just waited. I didn't move. I didn't breathe. I just stood still and waited. The sound came immediately. The scrape. But this time, it was right beside me. Not in front, not behind. Beside me. In my blind spot, there was no breath. No shuffling. Just presence. The air itself pressed inward, a tangible pressure, like something was occupying the exact same coordinates as the air around me, but without mass or form. "Are you down here?" I whispered. The question hung in the dead air. In response, the darkness ahead of me deepened, becoming absolute. Then one by one, the lights behind me shut off, plunging my only escape route into total blackness. For the very first time, it had cut me off. It had changed the rules. My heart was hammering against my ribs, but I didn't run. I stayed perfectly still. And as I stood there, frozen, I noticed something. It stopped advancing. The pressure beside me held its position. And that's when I finally understood. It wasn't responding to my motion. It was responding to my intent, to my decisions. Slowly, deliberately, I took one single step backward. My movement was measured without panic. The pressure beside me vanished. The darkness receded. One by one, the lights behind me flickered back to life, illuminating my path out. The corridor had released me. After that night, the entity seemed contained. As long as I followed the pattern it had learned. Walk 37 steps. Pause for 3 seconds. No hesitation. Continue on. It was a ritual, a silent agreement. As long as I played by its rules, it let me pass. The final night I ever worked there, the pattern broke. A train was delayed on the tracks directly overhead, and the constant heavy vibrations made the corridor's old lights flicker erratically. The system was in chaos, and the entity, it didn't wait. The darkness didn't creep or mirror me, it surged. It flooded the corridor from the far end, a silent black tsunami moving too fast to measure. I felt that impossible pressure slam against my chest, not crushing, but claiming, occupying my space. On pure instinct, I threw myself sideways into a small, recessed storage alcove and slammed the heavy steel access door shut. The pressure stopped instantly. The corridor outside fell into a silence that was more terrifying than any sound. It was absolute, too complete. I quit the next day. I didn't give a real reason. What could I say? A few weeks later, heard through the grapevine that the entire service corridor had been permanently sealed off, citing structural concerns. No one ever mentioned what or who was underneath. Sometimes even now, when I'm waiting for a train, I'll stand on the platform right above where that corridor runs, and I'll feel a vibration through the soles of my shoes that doesn't match the rhythm of the approaching trains. It's a hesitation, a pause, familiar beat in the silence. Whatever lives beneath that station, it didn't just chase me. It learned me. And standing here, I get the unnerving feeling that it's not done practicing. Thanks for listening. If you enjoyed this story, be sure to follow for more. Story 4. The chapel that kept one seat occupied. The chapel was never locked. That detail stayed with me from the first day I volunteered there. No chain on the doors, no padlock, just a heavy wooden entrance that closed softly behind you, as if it trusted whoever stepped inside. The caretakers always said it was meant to remain open, a place for reflection, not restriction. I didn't argue. The chapel sat alone on a low hill just outside town, separated from everything by a screen of trees and a narrow, winding road. During the day, it looked peaceful, almost ordinary. But at night, it felt attentive, not threatening, just aware. Inside, the space was modest. A cool stone floor, plain wooden pews, and a simple altar at the front. No stained glass, no elaborate icons, just 12 pews in total. I cleaned the chapel twice a week, usually in the evening when no one else was around. That's when I first noticed it. The third pew from the front, on the left side. At first, it was just a feeling, a strange pull. Whenever I entered the chapel, my eyes would drift toward that specific seat without any conscious intention. Not the entire pew, just one spot. It felt occupied, not visibly, not physically, but unmistakably taken. I brushed it off as my imagination running wild, until the first time the cushion dipped. I was near the altar lighting candles, when a faint creak echoed behind me. It was the sound of old wood responding to weight. I turned around slowly. The cushion on that third pew was rising, slowly returning to its original shape, as if someone had just stood up. I stood completely still, listening. The chapel offered nothing in response. No footsteps, no whispers, just the quiet flicker of candlelight dancing on the walls. Old buildings settle, I told myself, trying to rationalize it. But they don't sit down. After that, the sensation grew stronger. The air around that one seat felt different, sometimes cooler, sometimes oddly warm. It was never neutral. If I lingered too long nearby, my skin would prickle, the same way it does when you standing just a little too close to someone else in a crowd. I was invading their personal space. Then, small things started to happen. I'd find a hymn book left on the seat, when I knew for a fact I had stacked them all neatly away. A candle would extinguish for no reason, but only a candle near that pew. And every so often, I'd hear that faint creak again when no one had moved. Nothing dramatic, just this quiet, undeniable persistence. I decided to stay later one evening, finishing up well after sunset. The chapel dimmed as the last bit of natural light disappeared, and long dark shadows stretched across the floor. As I was mopping near the front, I heard the distinct sound of fabric shifting behind me. It was the sound of someone adjusting their posture in their seat. I turned. The third pew dipped again deeper this time. My heart was pounding in my chest. "I'll be done soon," I said quietly, my voice barely a whisper. I don't know why I spoke, but it felt like the polite thing to do. In response, the pressure on the cushion seemed to ease, almost as if it was acknowledging my statement. I finished my work as quickly as I could and left without looking back. My initial fear started to turn into curiosity. I asked the old caretaker about the chapel's history. He hesitated for a moment before answering. He told me about the private vigils that used to be held there years ago. People would come and sit alone for hours, sometimes for days, praying for loved ones who never returned from a war. One man came every night, he said, his voice low. Same seat, same time. The following week I returned late. The chapel welcomed me with its usual stillness. The candles burned evenly, and the air felt calm but focused. The third pew waited. I approached it slowly. Taking a deep breath, I sat down. The wood beneath me was cold, colder than the rest of the chapel. Almost immediately, the space beside me filled not with a touch, but with a presence. It was like someone was sharing the bench, their energy overlapping with my own, but without any physical weight. The pressure grew slightly. It wasn't aggressive, just present. I stood up abruptly. The pressure lingered for a moment longer, a tangible feeling in the air, then it faded, leaving the pew feeling empty once more. The ghost, if that's what it was, never showed itself. It didn't need to. It expressed itself through repetition, patience, and position. Always the same seat. Always the same quiet waiting. Night after night, I began to sense its moods. It felt restless when I tried to rearrange the pews for a deep cleaning. It was calm when I worked quietly around it. I even felt it was almost appreciative when I avoided that specific seat entirely. One evening, the atmosphere changed completely. As soon as I walked in, the air felt thick, heavy. The candle flames flickered unevenly, dancing wildly. The third pew creaked sharply, a sudden, jarring sound, as if someone had just sat down with immense force. The presence felt focused, expectant. "Who are you waiting for?" I whispered into the silence. The chapel seemed to hold its breath. The pressure beside me, which I hadn't even realized was there, shifted closer than it ever had before. And then it vanished. Completely. It wasn't a retreat. It felt like a release. The cushion on the third pew slowly rose back into place. The temperature in the room equalized. And for the first time since I'd started volunteering there, the third pew felt ordinary. Just an empty seat. I didn't return to the chapel for several weeks after that. When I finally did, the entire place felt lighter. It was still quiet, still solemn, but the energy was no longer concentrated around that one spot. The seat remained empty. A few days later, the caretaker mentioned that an anonymous donation had arrived. It was enough to replace all the old, worn-out pew cushions and make some much-needed repairs. "All of them," he said, smiling. "Even that old one on the third pew. The new cushion never dipped. It never creaked. It never drew my attention. But sometimes when the late afternoon light hits it just right, I think I feel a subtle movement in the air around it. Not someone settling in, but someone passing through. I still volunteer there. I still clean the pews and I still count them. 12. Always empty. Some ghosts don't linger to scare us. They stay because something remains unfinished. A vigil. A promise. A long wait. So if you ever find yourself sitting alone in a quiet chapel and feel like you resharing the bench, don't panic. It may simply be keeping someone company for the last time. Thanks for listening. Story 5. The warehouse that rearranged itself. I took the night shift because it paid more. Warehouse wasn't exactly abandoned. It was a fully operational distribution center during the day. But at night, it was just me. Endless rows of towering metal shelving, and a building large enough to swallow any sound you dared to make. I thought the isolation would be the easy part of the job. Turns out it just made the strange little changes impossible to ignore. My job was simple enough. Log any late arriving shipments and verify stock counts. Everything in that warehouse had a label, a barcode, a designated spot. Order was the entire point of the system. That's why I noticed when the order started to shift, the first change was so minor, I almost dismissed it. A box of industrial light bulbs I'd just scanned was no longer on its assigned shelf. I found it 2 aisles over, stacked neatly beside the cleaning supplies. I figured I must have misscanned it in the first place, so I just corrected the log, moved it back, and forgot about it. But the next night, the same box had moved again. And this wasn't random. It was aligned perfectly with the edge of a different shelf, its barcode facing outward, as if positioned deliberately for an easy scan. That's when I started to feel a little uneasy. Now, warehouses settle. Forklifts bump into shelves all the time. Workers make mistakes. But there were no forklifts running at night, and I was completely alone. I immediately went to check the security feed. The timestamp was clear. No one had entered the warehouse after 8:17 p.m. It was just me. The movements started to escalate, but gradually. Entire rows of shelving would shift by a few inches overnight. Pallets would rotate slightly on their own. Labels that were supposed to face out were now turned inward. It wasn't chaotic, though. Far from it. Everything was meticulously organized. It just wasn't according to our system. One night it got even weirder. Finished a full aisle count, turned around to grab my scanner from a cart, and when I turned back, the aisle looked compressed. Boxes that had been spaced evenly apart were now touching, side to side. It was as if something in the warehouse preferred density, wanted things packed tighter. I started walking the length of the aisle very slowly. The air felt heavy, almost thick between the shelves. My footsteps echoed strangely, like the sound was being absorbed before it could reach the high ceiling. Halfway down the aisle, I heard a sharp metallic clink right behind me. I spun around. A heavy wrench had just slid off a tool cart and hit the concrete floor. There was no vibration, no breeze, nothing to make it fall. It had been sitting too far from the edge to just tumble off on its own. As I stared at it lying there on the floor, the entire cart it fell from shifted a solid inch toward me. I jumped back instantly. The moment I did, the cart stopped moving. The air changed. You know that feeling of static building right before a lightning storm? It was like that. I felt watched, not from the security cameras above, but from the dark spaces between the shelves. The next night, I decided to run a little experiment. I went to an aisle and deliberately arranged several boxes unevenly. I left them crooked, misplaced, messy. Then I backed away, found a spot where I could watch, and just waited. It took less than 5 minutes. First, one box slid silently into perfect alignment. Then another followed. There was no sound of scraping cardboard, no friction, just this quiet, effortless correction. Something in this building preferred order. It definitely wasn't our order. Whenever the movement started, I noticed the temperature would drop significantly. The big overhead lights would flicker in a strange sequence, one aisle at a time, almost as if they were tracking motion that I couldn't see. The warehouse was starting to feel less like a place for storage and more like a massive system, constantly recalibrating itself. On a whim, I tried speaking out into the silence. I just said, "Is this your layout?" The nearest shelf vibrated faintly. A single box on it tipped forward, landing perfectly flush with the row of others. It was a response. It had heard me. This thing, whatever it was, it never threw anything at me. It wasn't aggressive. It didn't need to be. Its power was in its precision, its control, its constant, unnerving adjustments. The changes started affecting larger and larger items. I came in one morning to find a full pallet of packaged cables had shifted 3 feet overnight. There were no drag marks on the floor, no fresh impressions from a forklift. It had just relocated. I reviewed the security footage obsessively. You couldn't see the movement happen. The camera angle was always fixed, but between one frame and the next, objects would just be in slightly different positions. It was like the recording was skipping frames, or maybe reality itself was. One night, I decided to stay late, long past my shift. Midnight came and went. The lights began to flicker in a slow, hypnotic wave down the central aisle. The boxes on the shelves started to tremble. The metal shelving itself groaned softly, and then everything moved at once. It wasn't violent. It was systematic. Entire sections of shelving rotated a few degrees, pallets slid into perfectly straight rows. Empty spaces on shelves closed up as boxes slid together. The entire warehouse reorganized itself in less than 30 seconds. I was frozen, standing right there in the center of it all. The air pressed inward, but not against me. It felt like it was moving around me, leaving a human-sized gap in its invisible force field, completely untouched. The message couldn't have been clearer. You do not belong in the pattern. I slowly started backing toward the exit. Nothing moved. Nothing followed me. But as I left, I could see that every single object, every box, and every label was now perfectly aligned, facing inward toward the center aisle, toward where I had been standing. The next morning, the day shift manager noticed the new layout. They just assumed a day crew had made some efficiency adjustments and forgot to log it. No one questioned it, especially when they realized that product retrieval times had improved by 12%. They ended up adopting the new configuration permanently. I never told them it wasn't our design. I never told them that I didn't input a single one of those changes into the system. I transferred to a different shift 2 weeks later. As far as I know, that warehouse still operates, still perfectly organized, still impossibly precise. Sometimes I drive past it late at night. The big loading bay lights still flicker on and off in that strange sequential pattern. And I can't help but wonder if the warehouse is still adjusting itself, or if it's just waiting for something else to move out of place. Thanks for watching.